What if the most humiliating day of your professional life, the day they call you into a cold, sterile office to tell you your decades of experience are no longer needed, was actually a gift? I know that sounds insane. At 45, I was told my career was over. Kay became a ghost in the industry I helped build. My knowledge suddenly treated like an expired product. That is the great lie of the corporate world. And I'm here to tell you my story. They don't teach you this in business school. But the person a king fears most is the exiled advisor who knows all his secrets. My experience wasn't my weakness. It became my weapon, was cast aside. But I used the very blueprint of my old company's failures, the flaws only I could see to, not just get back on my feet, but to build an empire that systematically dismantled the one that threw me away. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the paradox of power and how, sometimes, losing everything is the only way to gain the clarity you need to win it all. Stay with me, because what happened next might just change how you view your own greatest challenges. You know, there's a certain kind of silence that's way louder than any spoken rejection. It's the silence of the void, of the empty inbox after sending out hundreds of resumes. I was living in that silence. My daily routine was a cycle where morning hope curdled into afternoon anxiety, and finally into evening apathy. I felt like my professional expiration date had passed, and the market, in its quiet, unanimous way, seemed to agree. The cruelest part wasn't the lack of responses, but the feeling of being completely invalidated. I used to think of it like this. Sending out my resume was like putting a message in a bottle. I'd toss it into the ocean of the job market, knowing it would probably sink or just wash up on a deserted beach. My entire life's experience felt like it was written in a dead language no one cared to read anymore. I got to a point where I stopped fighting and just accepted the drift. I stopped counting the implied no's, stopped polishing my online profile, stopped rehearsing for interviews that never came. The dessert of irrelevance had swallowed me whole. But there's a funny thing about rock bottom. The view from down here is completely different. It was only in that forced silence that I started to see the structural flaws that everyone else in their busy lives failed to notice. And from that unique vantage point, my grief and anger slowly started to morph into a kind of dangerous clarity. All my inside knowledge of the old company, every flawed process, every unhappy client who was ignored, every shortcut my ex-boss took out of pure arrogance, it all stopped being a painful memory. It became my greatest asset. A detailed blueprint of the weaknesses in an empire that thought it was untouchable. My big turning point wasn't some eureka moment. It was a slow dawning realization. I saw that my ex-boss was the captain of a luxury ocean liner so focused on the route that he ignored the passengers complaining about the leaky lifeboats. I didn't have a ship, but having worked in the engine room, I knew exactly how to fix those boats. I realized the market didn't need another liner. It needed a fleet of fast, safe lifeboats. All of a sudden, I wasn't a castaway anymore. I was the only person on the island who held the map to a treasure the king in his castle didn't even know he was losing. But here's the thing about a treasure map. Having it is the safe part. The real test, the thing that separates dreamers from doers, is the decision to start gathering driftwood on the beach to build that first boat, especially when the storm that wrecked you is still raging all around. Forget the glossy image of an entrepreneur. My start was in the most real and terrifying place imaginable, my own kitchen table. That was my global headquarters. My seed money didn't come from an investor. It came from my life savings, the very funds that were meant to be my family's safety net. Every bill I paid was a victory. Every day without a client was a reminder of the abyss just ahead, and the loneliness. That's the silent business partner of almost every founder. It was just me against the world, with no corporate noise to drown out the sound of my own fears. But that's where I found my strength. I started thinking of his company as a symphony orchestra, huge, expensive, and playing the same old songs. Mine, on the other hand, was a garage band. Raw sound, just a few instruments, but with perfect chemistry. In my garage band, a decision. That would take 5 meetings at the orchestra took me 5 minutes over a cup of coffee. This agility was my only weapon. And in the middle of that storm, with the sound muffled by the howling winds of fear, a neighbor, and then another, started to pause by my garage door. They weren't cheering yet, just listening with real curiosity. All I needed now was for one person to not only like the music, but to be willing to buy a ticket to my first show. And then the ticket was sold. But look, it wasn't just sold to some curious neighbor. The person who bought my first ticket was one of the most important passengers from my ex-boss's ocean liner. Someone who was tired of complaining about leaky boats and being ignored. The negotiation was tense. I wasn't just selling a service. I was selling a promise, a vision from my kitchen table. The moment that email with a simple yes landed in my inbox, it felt like I could breathe again. Anyone looking from the outside would have just seen a signed contract. But to me, that signature was the sweetest kind of symphony. It was the definitive proof that my experience wasn't a dead language, but the very solution the market was craving. Every dollar in that contract was an answer to all the ignored resumes and sleepless nights. For the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like a laid off professional. I felt seen, relevant. But here's the thing, a chord of success, when played with your entire soul, doesn't just fade away. It creates a vibration, a wave that travels far beyond the garage. And the other dissatisfied passengers on that big ship, it's the ones who are also tired of the same old music and the constant neglect. They felt that vibration in the air. That first chord wasn't just a single note of victory. It was the signal they had all been waiting for. That vibration didn't just travel. It became a homing beacon. Started with a single phone call from another one of my ex-boss's clients, then an email from a third. They all started the same way. I heard about the work you did for so-and-so. I wasn't launching an attack with some grand marketing plan. I was just answering the phone. The clients were the ones initiating contact, actively seeking out a better option, a safer lifeboat. Let's be clear. This wasn't a war that I declared. It was something more organic, more inevitable. The best way to picture it is like a swarm. It wasn't a frontal assault from a rival battleship. It was a quiet, steady migration. They weren't trying to sink my ex-boss's ship. They were simply abandoning a vessel that had stopped serving them. My small company became the unexpected safe harbor. And the hum of their departure began to echo in his empty halls. There's a point where a trickle becomes a current. And a current becomes a tide. My garage band wasn't just a novelty anymore. It was a legitimate competitor. A massive ship can ignore a few dents in its hull. But when its own fleet starts sailing away, the whole vessel begins to list. The water wasn't just splashing the sides anymore. It was pouring through the gaps they left behind. That quiet hum was about to become a final, deafening alarm. That final alarm didn't ring with a sudden bang, but with a quiet, inevitable whisper. The news trickled in, not through some dramatic headline, but through the digital grapevine. A LinkedIn post about layoffs. A message from an old colleague. First came the rumors of financial trouble, then the official news of bankruptcy protection. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the slow, heavy collapse of a structure that had been rotting from the inside for years. And you'd think after everything I had been through, that this moment would feel like a loud, champagne-popping celebration. But it wasn't. It was quiet. It was the confirmation that I didn't need to destroy him. He did that to himself by refusing to change. My victory wasn't his fall. It was my own rise. In the end, the great ocean liner sank under its own weight. And the once mighty orchestra was silenced for good. My story was never truly about revenge. It was always about relevance. This serves as a powerful reminder of a fundamental truth. True power isn't measured by the size of your ship. but by your willingness to listen to the passengers. Giants don't fall because they are attacked. They crumble from within, made deaf by the sound of their own ego. So, the empire built on ego was dismantled by the one I built from ashes. My story is a testament that the market doesn't define your value due. I didn't just find a new job. I created a new reality where my experience was my ultimate competitive advantage. I couldn't find a seat at the table, so I built a better table, and in the end, all the most valuable guests came to me. But this story isn't just about me. It's a mirror held up to you. So I have to ask, what insider knowledge are you holding? Right now, what problem at your job or in your industry are you uniquely qualified to solve because of the very frustrations you face every day? What injustice are you accepting as a final chapter when it could be the explosive first sentence of your comeback story? The difference between inspiration and transformation is a single decision. If you're ready to stop seeing your challenges as dead ends and start seeing them as your own personal treasure map, then your journey starts now. I hope my story can be the spark for yours.